There we go. So, hi, welcome everybody. My name is Marion McLaughlin from Autism Understanding Scotland, and I'm joined by my colleague Felicity and Sophia, and we're going to be looking at how to support autistic customers in retail. Anytime I attend a training session, I always want to know who are these people. So we got a little introduction. As I said, my name is Marion. I am the CEO at Autism Understanding Scotland. I'm a late diagnosed autistic adult. So I was diagnosed when I was 39 a few years ago. Quite a varied career beforehand, including working as a primary school teacher and a few other jobs where I worked with autistic people. Mother of an autistic child, spokesperson for the Scottish Government's Different Minds campaign, was involved in the rewrite of the NHS Inform Pages on Autism and quite a few other things. Felicity, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I am Felicity or Flick. I'll answer to either, and I'm a senior autism practitioner at Autism Understanding Scotland. I'm also late diagnosed autistic as well. I was fortunate enough to get my diagnosis just earlier this year. I did know for quite a few years beforehand that I was autistic, but I was finally able to actually access an assessment very recently. I'm also as well a mother to two autistic children, and I'm the co-chair of the Aberdeenshire Autism Strategy Planning Group at the moment. So yeah, that's very good.
Thank you. So what can people expect today? So we are going to discuss why supporting autistic customers is worthwhile, why shops and other retail settings should be doing so. We're going to share some really good examples of great practice. And we're going to talk about small changes that people can make that can make a huge, big difference. We're going to talk about what to do whenever things go wrong, because sometimes with the best will in the world, things sometimes do go wrong. But that doesn't mean they have to stay wrong. We've got some ideas on how to help out. And whenever we're finished, we will have an opportunity for discussion and some questions. But Felicity, we've got this lovely graphic, haven't
Yeah.
we?
So I believe it was actually our lovely colleague Sophia who is in the chat. If anybody watching us live has any questions or anything that they would like to ask, she found this brilliant poster here, and this just kind of looks at what shops would be missing out on if they're not making their shops accessible to not specifically autistic but disabled customers, and obviously autistic people do sort of fall into that umbrella as well. It's just looking at the fact that 73% of potential disabled customers experience barriers on more than one quarter of websites they visited. Looking at the fact that 1 in 5 potential UK consumers has a disability. So it's really kind of looking at the fact that it is worthwhile from a financial point of view for kind of shops, for retail kind of settings, to really be thinking about all of their customers, and that is including their disabled customers, that's including their autistic customers, because actually they're missing out on an awful lot of kind of repeat custom and things like that, if they don't kind of consider us in that way. And I'm sure that anybody who has signed up for this will get a copy of the slides, and you'll get to see that poster in a little bit more detail. It's sort of looking at things like the loss of money for a business per month if you're not kind of being accessible on a high street shop is 267 million pounds. We're talking about large quantities here. We're not talking about sort of tiny amounts at all, are we?
Absolutely, yeah. But there's also lots of other reasons why we should be making sure that places are accessible for autistic customers. We tend to be very loyal, committed customers. Um, so once we find a brand or a shop that we like, we tend to be really happy about going back to that one, and we do very often end up sticking to the one shop, the one brand, if we become really comfortable with it. Word of mouth as well. A lot of autistic people, whenever they're needing to go and get, for example, new glasses or go and get try a new shoe shop, will ask other autistic people, where did you have a good experience? Were they understanding? Were they good with you? Was it a noisy shop? All these sorts of things. So we will tell other autistic people if we have a good experience with your shop. Supporting autistic customers mean you're supporting other marginalized groups as well. So we generally find that whenever you make somewhere more accessible for autistic people, you're making it more accessible for an awful lot of other people as well. And also, some autistic people really like to shop. So some autistic people aren't too fussed about it and they might just go whenever they have to. But for some autistic people, shopping is a really big part of their life that they absolutely enjoy, especially whenever it relates to their special interest. So if you've got something that you're really, really enthusiastic about, then you might want to go and shop to get things that are related to that special interest. And also, changing brands can be difficult for many autistic people, but we are willing to do it if we've had a bad experience somewhere. So it might be a wrench, but if we've had a really bad experience somewhere, then we might find it difficult to return, and we will go ahead and use somewhere else if we feel that we need to. Yeah. Felicity?
So yeah, some other things to kind of bear in mind as well are that all autistic people are unique. So what one autistic person might struggle with in a shop might not faze the next autistic person. You know, what one really likes about a shop might not be the case for the next. So it is important to treat us as individuals. And if you do have an autistic customer who's kind of come looking for some support, then asking them specifically what they need rather than assuming, well, you're autistic, so this must be what you need, is really essential, because we are all very different. And there's also no kind of look for autism. You know, there's no one way that our faces are arranged, so you can't tell just by looking at somebody whether or not they are autistic. You know, we might have certain things that could kind of be clues. You know, we might be a bit more likely to be wearing ear defenders in a shop, for instance, but a lot of us don't, and not all people who are wearing ear defenders are necessarily autistic either. So you know, there isn't actually a stamp that we each get to, you know, on our foreheads to let the world know that we are autistic. So it might not be the people that you're expecting. So just sort of be open-minded about that. You know, accept that it might not be the person that you have, you know, picked out of the store that you reckon is autistic who is the autistic. Well, might be that they are, but also somebody else is autistic who you would never have guessed, because you just can't tell by kind of looking at us. And along the same lines, we're not obliged to carry, you know, a kind of card, you know, an autism information card or a sunflower lanyard or something like that with us at all times. So again, you can't just tell by looking at somebody whether or not they are autistic. There are lots of reasons that we might not want people to know that we are autistic. You know, there is still quite a lot of stigma around autism. It might not be something that we want to advertise. So yeah, you won't necessarily be able to tell visually whether or not one of your customers is autistic. And that can be really important, I think, to remember, because yeah, assumptions can be made, you know, based on how somebody looks, and they're not always going to be very useful. And any autistic person can hit a crisis point. So when we're talking about crisis points, we're talking about meltdowns, which I think most people have heard of, you know, a sort of explosion of kind of emotions, shutdowns where we sort of retreat into ourselves. It's much like an implosion rather than an explosion, or elopement where we just kind of need to get away from the situation that we are in. But it's not just little children who can experience these. Any autistic person can have a crisis point. And so it's not helpful to judge an adult who maybe is having a really hard time, you know, in the middle of a busy supermarket or something, because it may well be that they are autistic and they're experiencing one of these crisis points. And that's not something that we choose. That is a neurological event that takes place in the brain that we don't have any control over. So it's not something that we can help at all. And shopping can be a real sensory overload, actually. There's an awful lot going on when you go into a shop, a lot of noise, a lot of visual stuff, a lot of smells, you know, a lot of people kind of touching you and the like. So there's a lot going on, and sensory overload is a kind of very real possibility for many of us when we are going shopping. We also don't all have carers. There's a bit of a misconception, you know, if you say you are autistic and you're going to be shopping, you know, oh, well, could you tell your carer to say, you know, X to the staff? Well, many autistic people don't have carers, actually. In fact, a lot of autistic people are carers for other people a lot of the time, which can be quite surprising for some people to learn. I would fall into that category myself. So yeah, it's not as simple as, well, can't you just take your carer with you? Well, can't you just instruct your carer to do X for you? Because a lot of the time we're going to be going by ourselves, or we're going to have dependents with us. We're not going to have somebody with us supporting us specifically. And we can also have a different processing speed. Now, sometimes that means that actually we process information a lot faster than non-autistic people. Sometimes that means that we might need a little more time than non-autistic people. So taking your cue from the customer you're talking to is really quite important. Don't, on the one hand, if I tell somebody, well, I'm autistic, I don't want them to slow down their speech for me, because I find that really difficult to process. Actually, doing that is not going to make it any easier for me to understand you. But it might be that if you have a customer who does seem to be taking a little bit longer to respond when you're talking to them, then maybe do just allow them a little bit of space, a little bit of time to respond, and maybe break up your speech into shorter chunks as well, rather than slowing down every word. Instead, it can be more helpful to just split your speech up into kind of smaller chunks and then leave a bit of a pause. And that's a more natural way, actually, of allowing people to process things if they are needing that little bit of extra time. Have I covered everything there, Marion?
Yeah, I mean, it's always good to check with somebody, is this speed working for you? Is there something else that I can do that can be helpful? And in some cases, sometimes for me, I need people to speed up a little bit. So it really is very individual, because on some days I might not need that. It's because we vary so much throughout the day. The same customer might need something different on a different day, mightn't we?
Absolutely.
Well, as you said, say, shopping can be a bit of a sensory overload. So we thought that we would take an example of why it can be quite difficult. We'll also talk about what sort of things can be done to support. But if we're thinking about why shopping, why retail can be quite tricky for many autistic people. Um, one of the experiences that many of us have whenever we go in is really harsh, bright lighting. Now we understand that you need people to be able to see the products really well, but for people who are very sensitive to light, this can be quite difficult. And many autistic people are able to see lights flickering before non-autistic people are able to see them as well, because our vision can be incredibly sensitive an awful lot of the time. So that can be quite tricky. That can be difficult. If there's music playing, that can sometimes be a barrier for us coming into the shop as well, because that's just an extra level of sensory input that we may like, and sometimes we may not like it as well. So it depends if we're sensory seeking in that area, or if we're sensory avoiding. But for many people, where they will not go into supermarkets where they generally play music unless they're in a really good place. Tannoy announcements, some of them are, you may not be able to avoid them, but sometimes you do wonder, why are they announcing this? Is this necessary? Is this enhancing our experience in the shop? So that can be something else that's really tricky whenever you're already, if they're listening to the music and then the music has to stop and then there's an announcement and then the music starts again. That can be quite jarring. That's an awful lot of transitions for some autistic people, which can be difficult. Sometimes crying children, and as parents, we do appreciate that sometimes children cry in supermarkets. That's just part of the experience of being in a supermarket sometimes. But for some autistic people, especially hyper empathetic autistic people, when somebody's clearly in distress and you're not able to go and help, that can be quite difficult at times. And sometimes the pitch of the voice when someone is crying and upset can be quite difficult for us to process as well. As well as bright lights, we can also have some very bright packaging too. So some packaging on some products can be really quite overwhelming at times, especially if there's lots of print all over it and clashing colors. Some autistic people really like that, and some autistic people find it really difficult. So it very much depends on the autistic person too. But whenever there's lots and lots of different packaging, especially if it's lots of very bright, very clashing colors, it can look really visually busy, and that can be a tremendous amount for us to process on top of everything else as well. There can be a lot of strong smells. Some aisles, particularly, the fish aisle, some of the meat aisles, the bread aisle, some of the laundry detergent aisles and things as well can all have very, very powerful smells. And for those of us who are sensitive to smell, that can sometimes be very, very difficult for some of us as well, especially if we're going through some hormonal changes as well. That can make it sometimes even harder too. But then there's also the smells of the other customers. Is there somebody going past you who's wearing some really strong perfume? The laundry detergent, even from the other customers as well. So it can be quite difficult. If somebody's been smoking who's going past you, and you have an issue with the smell of the smoke too. Things that other people might not notice, a lot of your autistic customers might be very sensitive to it. The noise of the trolleys and cages whenever they're rattling about is something that many of us who are autistic really, really struggle with. And people bumping into you. Now, we understand that, when people bump into us, especially in a pandemic, it is, and the vast majority of the time, it is not meant. But if you are an autistic person who keeps on feeling touch after it's happened and you're still processing it and you're already feeling a little bit stressed, that can be quite difficult as well. Tills and handheld scanners beeping can be quite tricky for many of us as well, because we never know when that beep is coming. And then sometimes there's the noise of if somebody has forgotten to take a tag off something and then the alarm goes off. That can be, well, alarming, right, Flick? That can be quite difficult for some of us as well. So there's lots and lots of different things that we can find inside a supermarket. I mean, the one thing that I would add that we haven't put onto this list is hand dryers as well.
Yes, yes, hand dryers in toilets can be, yeah, very, very difficult, can't they? You've got the noise is particularly difficult, but even the sensation and the way that the air kind of moves around them can be, yeah, really unpleasant for quite a lot of autistic people. So yeah.
Definitely. So, what do you think, Flick? Autism friendly or autism appropriate? Or a bit
Okay.
of both?
All
Yeah, or
right.
both.
So we've seen, yeah, like autism friendly is something that kind of crops up an awful lot. A lot of places do like to advertise themselves as being, autism friendly. And I think we do appreciate the effort, don't we? We appreciate the motive behind that, and see that as good. But sometimes saying that something is autism friendly can, for one thing, be a little bit patronizing, oh, we're so inclusive to those autistic people. And sometimes as well, what we need is not friendliness. Come in, autistic people, come in here. What we need is for the space to be appropriate. We need it to be autism appropriate rather than autism friendly. So when we're talking about something being autism appropriate, we're looking at, has the person who's sort of responsible for creating this environment thought about autistic needs? Have they thought about how they can actually make something that's going to be easier for autistic people, and sort of create a space that's going to make them feel safer, where they're less likely to be kind of overloaded and overwhelmed. So yeah, rather than friendly, we tend to use the term, autism appropriate, and that's not to say that, yeah, we would necessarily kind of roll our eyes if we see somewhere advertised as autism friendly, because like I said, we do appreciate the meaning behind that, the sort of well-meaning, but it's maybe getting some kind of retail places to just think about some of the language they're using and think about what they have actually done to make it friendly or appropriate, and whether it's just sort of 1 hour a week, oh yeah, we're friendly towards autistic people at this one specific time, or whether actually you've made an effort to make the environment appropriate for us for as much of the time as possible.
Mm. Well, that's a really good time to sort of link into some examples of good practice, and we have spoken with both of these places to check that they were happy with us mentioning them. But these are two places that we've been in touch with where we found some really good practice there. So Jump In Trampoline Parks in Aberdeen, during a recent visit with a certain young man who was wearing ear defenders. As soon as the staff saw they were wearing ear defenders, they were very quick to sort of say, how much they were rocking those ear defenders and they were looking great. And since they were aware that they were wearing those, they were very quick to offer to this child as well as to me that because they weren't just talking to the child, they were talking to me, they were talking to both of us, that they could turn down the strobe lights, that they were able to turn down the music or turn up the music if we needed it as well, that they were able to sort of help us out in any way that we needed in order to make the area more accessible for them. And that was without us having to ask in the first place. They were really, really keen to ensure that everybody who was visiting was going to have a really, really positive experience, and that it was as accessible for them as possible. And so that was a really good example. And I really liked as well that even though they run some accessible sessions, some relaxed sessions, at no point did they say that we should go to them, but they did say that we could go to them if they worked for us, if those times worked for us. So I thought that's a really good example of practice there. The other one is from a toy store in Bath. So it's Bath's famous toy store, My Small World. Now, what I really love about this place is that the owner has an autistic child themselves, and they have autistic staff members, and they worked with autistic staff members to work out what they were going to put on their, they call it their A board, and they are proudly autism friendly, but they are also autism appropriate at the same time. So they can turn down music, they can sort out lights, they can sort of, provide some quieter areas. They are happy to support people stimming and flapping. They're so happy to support people sort of jumping about and having to explore things. And they're also not fazed if anybody's having a meltdown or sort of needs some space as well. So right even before you get into the shop, you can already see that they're making an effort to be as appropriate and as inclusive as possible, which really does help because autistic people already do so much ourselves to try and make these places accessible, don't we, Flick?
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to have a look at some of the things that we may already be doing to kind of help ourselves, to support ourselves when we're out in kind of retail environments. So we might be wearing sunglasses. So if you do see, customers wearing sunglasses inside, they might not being just a diva, being a diva or anything like that. It may well be because actually, the lights are too bright and they're really struggling with that, and wearing the sunglasses makes the shop a bit more accessible for them. We might choose to wear headphones so that we can drown out some of those other sounds and the music that's playing with our own music. And that can make things easier because, we can pick music that is going to fit our mood, music that we might find soothing. We know what to expect. We know what song is coming up next, things like that. If perhaps for whatever reason we don't want to be listening to music, we might use ear defenders or earplugs instead. Sometimes if I'm shopping, especially if I have one of my kids with me, and I maybe don't want to drown out them, or whether or not I want to, I shouldn't. So I need to be able to hear kind of, speech patterns. It might be more useful to have, certain kinds of earplugs or ear defenders that still allow me to hear what they're saying, but sort of deaden some of the other noises that are going around, some of the kind of clattering of trolleys and things like that. A hoodie can be really helpful for both sort of dampening the noise a bit, for helping with the light a little bit, but also because it creates, your own little safe space. You put that hood up and that's like it's creating your own little safe space inside there. Also, the fabric might be one that, you find very soothing as well. And it might be that the toggles on the hoodie can kind of be used to stim with and things. So that can be really useful. A brimmed hat, much like the sunglasses and hoodie, can really help with the lights. Something like a baseball cap, or something with a kind of wider brim can help to stop that light that's coming from above, and because they can be very unpleasant. Masks can, I mean, for some autistic people, masks are not pleasant from a sensory point of view, and they've actually maybe really struggled during the pandemic with having to wear one. For other autistic people, they found that masks have helped because, you know, it helps with smells. If you are struggling with some of the strong smells, you can even dab like a little bit of scent inside the mask as well. It can also help in terms of if you stim, you know, by biting your lips or something like that. People can't see that when you've got a mask on. If you're singing along to your music quietly, people can't see that when you've got your mask on. I know that's one that Marion, you know, appreciates the masks for. So yeah, so they can sometimes actually be quite helpful as well for some autistic people. Using a strong scent that you do like to overcome kind of some of the more unpleasant ones can be helpful. That might be something that you've dabbed onto like a sleeve or a tissue or something. It might just be the smell of your fabric softener. You know, again, if you've got that hoodie, you know, my nice fabric softener, whatever kind of can be helpful. Bringing along a supporter, sometimes that's not an option, but sometimes it is, and that can be really useful, having somebody with you. They can sort of help if you need to communicate with other people and you're maybe not feeling able to at that particular time. They can help keep you on track, you know, help make sure that you're getting everything on your list. If there are particular aisles that are really difficult for a sensory reason, you can kind of send them down the aisle whilst you wait at the end with the trolley, for a whole host of reasons that can be really useful. We might have some sort of communication card with us. So, you know, you often get autism alert cards, which we find, yeah, a little bit odd, because we were not sure that anybody should be alerted to us being autistic. We are currently just sort of redeveloping an autism information card with NHS Grampian, which will be available on our website once that's complete, I believe. And that can then give some information to people about, you know, anything that you need it to, really, in terms of what being autistic means for you and what they can do to help support you. You can sort of buy, you know, cards online as well, pre-made ones that can be useful with information about sensory needs, you know, information explaining if you have situational mutism and you're unable to sort of speak at that moment. Things like that can be quite useful. Going at quieter times, often not necessarily the, you know, autism friendly hour, but a time that actually suits our busy lives and things. You know, that might be sort of earlier in the morning, you know, maybe before you're having to do school drop off or something. It might be kind of later in the evening when other people are eating their dinners. It might be that actually sort of midday is a quieter time and that suits your schedule. But most autistic people I know kind of carefully pick when it is they're going to go shopping to make sure that it's going to be at a time that suits them and is maybe sort of less busy, less stressful.
Mhm. I always make sure that I've got stim toys with me as well, so that I've got something in my pocket that can help to sort of keep me very, very chilled out as well. So, clothing that I know is definitely going to make me feel more comfortable as well. So, there's lots of different things that autistic people already do before they even leave the house in order to get ready. So, we think it's good whenever people try and sort of meet us part of the way. So, now that you know what some of the things that we do as autistic people, what can you do as a retailer? And so we've got some suggestions for some things that you can do. We've seen some retailers using color coded baskets. So you might have one color for if you want to get some help with your shopping. You know, do you want someone who can come and suggest outfits for you? Do you want someone who can help you find which shelf something is on? And then we can have different color baskets for people who don't want any help with their shopping. So actually, I'd rather do it completely by myself. And if I have a question, then I will come and ask you instead. And then it can be really difficult for some autistic people to go and initiate a conversation with the member of staff. Whereas if they can see that we're looking for help with the visual cue, then that's really handy. It can also be difficult for some autistic people when a member of staff comes up and asks you if you need help, and then you have to try and politely decline, because that's just another bit of social contact that can sometimes be a bit tiring for us when we might already be getting tired out. Easily accessible quiet areas. If I have to go and ask you for a key to get into a quiet area or ask permission to be using it in the first place, if I've got to ask for a key to get into an accessible toilet, that's not really very accessible to me. I need to be able to access these quiet areas. I need to be able to access the toilets without having to go and have a conversation with somebody else. As someone who does experience situational mutism, sometimes it's just not always possible for me to verbalize. And sometimes if I've forgotten to bring along a notepad, then I might not find it very easy to communicate it in other ways. And sometimes if someone's anxiety is really high, or if they're on the verge of a meltdown or another crisis point, they might not be able to, they might not feel like they're able to come and talk to you in the first place. Having adjustable lights and music can really make a difference as well. And we understand that for some shops that this will be really difficult. But if this is something that can be embedded into the design of a shop, well, if you're in the process of setting up somewhere, what are you doing to make these things adjustable? Are you able to turn off half the lights in the shop and still be able to see? Are you able to use a dimmer that doesn't whine very much? Yeah, so have a think about what it is that you can do to make adjustments to the environment so that it will suit the people who are in the shop at that time, because all autistic people have a different sensory profile. We all have different needs. Paper towels as well as or instead of hand dryers. Um, for me personally, if we could have a world without hand dryers, I would be perfectly content. But I do appreciate that that's not likely to happen. However, for some, especially younger autistic people, the thought that there might be a hand dryer and it might go off accidentally can make toilets really inaccessible. And especially if you couple that with them not always being aware of when they need to go to the toilet until they absolutely desperately need to go to the toilet, then that can be quite tricky. So making sure that there are some paper towels that are available is going to make it an awful lot easier for us. And don't talk down to us as well. As Felicity had sort of mentioned earlier, sometimes some autistic people have different processing speeds, but that doesn't mean that we need people to talk down to us. You can talk to us the same way you would talk to any other customer. Give a little bit of extra processing time if required. Don't if that's not required, but do treat us with the same courtesy and respect you would with anybody else. There's a few other things that people can do, isn't there, Flick?
Yeah,
Yeah.
so we've got some more ideas as well. You can make sure that you've got good information and services online. So, we like to know information ahead of time. So if we can check things out online before we go to your store, that's really good. If we're able to get the information that we want online rather than having to kind of call you or come into the shop, that's absolutely brilliant. And that's going to really kind of make us feel pretty positively towards you as well. We like to have clear signs. You often have these sort of signs that were once perhaps relevant, and then things have moved around in the shop, and by the time you're going in and you're kind of going, right, okay, so I need to go and get the milk, and you find yourself in the middle of the meat aisle and you're going, this is not what it says on the sign. And that's because there's been a bit of a move around since the signs were put into place. So make sure that all the signs are actually still relevant, and that they're as clear as possible as well, so that you're not going to be getting confusion, because we don't have to come and ask a member of staff, because we can look and see very clearly, all right, the thing I need will be in that aisle over there. We're going to feel a lot more comfortable. So yeah, try to actually engage with autistic customers and staff. There is a very good chance that you will have autistic staff members. So checking with them what their needs are, that's really important. And actually seeing what your autistic customers would like as well, rather than kind of making assumptions, is really good practice. Because as we covered earlier, we are all unique, we are all individuals, we're not all going to want exactly the same things. So especially if you're the kind of place where you're going to have sort of usual customers coming in, repeat customers coming in again and again, if you can find out what sorts of things are going to be helpful for them, then that's brilliant. And then allow multiple communication channels for inquiries. So if I want to find out if a shop stocks something and I have to phone ahead to see, then automatically I'm less likely to bother with that shop than if I have an option to go online and check instead. If I can email them, or if I can check stock levels online, or sort of do it online shopping and things like that, then that's going to be, yeah, much, much better. So we know that not all shops can actually offer, online shopping, but if you can at least have an email option for inquiries and things, that really can make a massive, massive difference for kind of anxiety levels. And please don't, like Marion said, don't insist we come during quiet hours. If you have these, things available, then you can let us know. That's fine. But actually, we're not, vampires who can only go out at certain times of the day. Or like we have our own lives, we have our own jobs and families, and sometimes we just have our own preferences as well as to when we want to do our shopping. We don't want to be forced into going at a certain time of day because that's the only time we're allowed to access the shop. Yeah, try to allow us as much choice as possible, like you would with any customer. And we also might have a few more questions than other customers, so just be patient with that. We like to have as much information as possible, and sometimes things that might seem obvious to other people are not obvious to us, so we will just need to ask to clarify. So if we are asking a lot of questions, if you have a customer who always seems to be asking questions constantly, just be patient with them. It might be that they're autistic, it might be that there's a bit of anxiety around certain aspects of the shop, it might just be that we're they're trying to clarify something before making a purchase. And yeah, just kind of be patient and bear with us. And I know I did kind of quickly go over crisis points earlier, but I think that Marion is now going to look at those in much more detail.
Well, a bit more. We do have lots of information about our on our website about crisis points and what they are. But just a little rundown, because again we want to make sure that there's some time for people to ask questions before we finish up in 20 minutes. So a meltdown looks an awful lot like a tantrum to an awful lot of people, except meltdowns are uncontrolled neurological events. Tantrums are very, very much about control. A meltdown won't stop as soon as somebody gets something that they want, whereas a tantrum will stop as soon as somebody gets what they want. No autistic person wakes up in the morning and thinks, today will be a great day to have a meltdown. It's not something that we choose to experience. It's not something that we have any fun going through. Shutdowns are very, very similar to meltdowns, except they're all internalized. So, and during a meltdown, which really is a big crisis point, which feels awful, a shutdown is a big crisis point, which feels awful, but very often people don't really see that we're experiencing them to the same extent. You might see sometimes with some autistic children just lying down on the floor in the middle of a supermarket, which could be them having a shutdown rather than them having a meltdown. And elopement is when a customer might tell you that they can't stay. You might be trying to explain something to them, but there might be very, very big reasons why they just can't stay in the shop. So in the past, I've left shops because there's been really poor customer service and I didn't really want to stay anymore. And if I'd stayed, then I might be experiencing a meltdown or a shutdown, and I didn't want to be having that in public. I've also left shops because the smell of the candles were so overwhelming that I was going to have a meltdown or a shutdown if I'd stayed, because it was too much sensory input. Even though for some people it was very pleasant sensory input, for me it was too overwhelming. So I had to leave. If anybody wants to learn more about crisis points, we do have information on our website, and I think it would be a good idea for us to run a webinar on crisis points again, right, Flick?
Yes, definitely. I think
Yeah,
that's always a good one to cover.
absolutely. So if somebody does have a crisis point in your store, there are some things that you can do.
Yeah, you can. So some things that you can do to help support an autistic customer who is going through a crisis point is give us space. Because quite often when you are going through that, you can feel a bit like the world is kind of closing in on you. You're maybe getting too much sensory kind of input already, so we don't need people kind of crowding in around us. That's not going to help. So giving us a bit of space, stepping back, is really useful. Gently kind of asking if there is anything that you can do, if there are any adjustments that you can make. that can be really useful. It might be that we are able to explain. It might be that we have a card or something, ready that we can use to communicate that. It might be that we can't, though. So if you ask and you don't get a response, then it might just be that we're not able to articulate that, at that time. But do let us know if there is a quiet area available, if there's somewhere we can go, maybe a sort of office or a quieter kind of corner of the store, or somewhere that we can go to kind of help calm us down. And do try to ensure that there's some privacy as well, if there's no quiet space available. So I know that some shops have kind of screens that they can bring out, which can be useful, sometimes used for if there is like a customer having a seizure or something like that, or they've had something happen and waiting for an ambulance. So yeah, if you have something like that, that might be a good idea to bring out as well, just to allow us some privacy, because it's not nice to feel like everyone's staring at you, is it?
No, it's not at all. And I think it's something that, some autistic people have experienced, or sometimes people end up taking videos of autistic people in meltdowns and then popping them online or popping them into Facebook groups. And as an autistic person, if I'm having a meltdown, that's me at my absolute most vulnerable. And if you think about how you were at your most vulnerable, would you like that to be out there in public? Would you like that to be online? Would you like, the other customers who use the same supermarket as you to be seeing that too? Probably not. So if there is any way that you can get that privacy and really respect that, then that is a good thing, isn't it? Yeah. We don't all like to be reminded of what we were like whenever we were having a really hard time, do we?
No.
No. Um, and there's a couple of other things that you can do as well. Yeah, so do check. Yeah, do they have an information card that they can hand over if they're struggling to speak to you? They might not, but they might do. So that can be handy if they do. And be empathetic, because it is really hard watching someone else having a crisis point. We do get that, and it's as carers of other autistic people who have crisis points, and we have friends who are autistic and we've supported them through crisis points as well. We know it's really hard watching somebody experiencing a crisis point, but believe us, it is far harder being the person who is having the crisis point. So just try and be empathetic and understand that this isn't something that we're choosing to do. We are having a hard time. Don't ask us to calm down. um, have a think about, again, whenever you've been at your most vulnerable, if somebody asked you to calm down, would it actually help you to calm down? Because chances are it probably doesn't. So try and avoid using that kind of language. If we could calm down, we would. We absolutely would. We don't want to be in that crisis point. So be understanding. We're not choosing to do this. Yeah. And the crisis points don't last forever. Nobody stays in a meltdown for the whole of their lives. um they will pass, and if you deal really well with your customer while they're having that crisis point, they are more likely to come back and use your shop again. And I think that's the kind of a good sort of last place to leave it, isn't it? Is that as loyal, committed customers, we want to come back and give you our business. We want to be going to the same places that have worked for us before. We want to go to places that really work with us and understand us, don't we, Felicity?
Yeah, absolutely. So it does make a big difference.
Yeah. Well, we hope people have found this useful. So I'm going to stop the recording just now. And thank you so much for those of you who have watched. Um, let's see.